We appreciate you joining us here this afternoon to listen to a talk with Janna, and we'd like to thank Janna for being here. It's great to hear about the thought process and the artist herself. So kicking that off, we're surrounded by Janna's most recent body of work, Speaking in Tongues, and thank you for coming.
Oh my goodness. I thank you to everyone who's here today, taking your time out of your weekend. It's such an honor to be in your presence. And it's funny because I was reminiscing last night about a psychic reading that I had a few months ago. And when you get a psychic reading, you want to hear like, all your shows are going to sell out, or like Gucci wants to collaborate with you, or like, you're going to get a proposal of some kind. But the psychic told me that I was going to be doing more public speaking, and I was like, no, thank you. Like, it's okay. But here you all are inside of this prediction coming true. So she never told me how it was going to go. So we're about to find out.
I think it's going to go quite well.
All right. Well.
So kicking it off, what inspired you to be an artist?
So I'm going to give you a little bit of the long answer for that since we have time and you all came to hear that. If you read my artist statement, I grew up in an evangelical household. My dad was a Pentecostal pastor. And so I lived and breathed church. I was at church all the time. And quite naturally, after high school, I thought I was going to go into the ministry and become a pastor too. And I did this really intense Christian program after high school. And basically, I was married to Jesus. I literally had a wedding ring on my finger. And consequently, I fell in love with my best friend, who was not Jesus and was not a man. And so I realized in this really intense program that I was gay, and that doesn't really align with the evangelical belief system. So that was a little bit of a tricky time of my life, but I decided to explore a little bit more about who I am and my creativity, and from there I decided to go to OCAD. And when I was at OCAD, I realized that the paint supplies that my grandfather had been buying me my whole life were artist grade because I couldn't afford them at OCAD. So my grandfather and my grandmother were very prevalent influences in my creativity. My grandfather was an abstract painter. He went to Pratt Institute in New York. He owned a flower shop in Parkdale, and he actually made this incredible installation for the Queen in 1969 of 2 million roses. He was a very prolific, creative person. My grandmother went to OCAD in the 40s, and back when OCAD was like a one-room schoolhouse, basically, and she was taught painting by A.Y. Jackson, one of the group of 7. So I grew up with this extremely cultured, creative grandparents. My grandfather, I guess he saw something in me because he really cultivated my creativity. He gave me watercolor lessons. And one day he lived on a farm with 100 acres. And one day he sent me out into the backfield and to paint the essence of a tree. And I ended up painting this tree that looked like it was on fire or something, but I brought it back to him, and his critique to me was it was okay, but it needed to be wilder. And so he really cultivated, the idea of understanding and picking up the essence of things and making things wilder. So I can really say that he really set me on the trajectory of becoming an artist and encouraged me. So yeah.
That's a good mantra.
Yeah. Be wilder.
Be wilder.
Yeah.
So I guess from those formative years, how did you break into the industry? Were there any defining moments for you in your early days that, as an artist?
Mm-hmm. So there were 2 pretty prevalent things that happened to me early on. When I moved to Toronto, I worked at a hotel, and I basically made coffee every morning and served it to the property manager. And I also was going to OCAD full time while I was doing this job. It was crazy. I was like always working. And the property manager came in one day and he was like, oh, I heard you're an artist. Do you want to do this show in the lobby of the hotel? He had never seen my work because this is like 2006, so no iPhones. No, I didn't have a website yet. Like he didn't, I don't know. It was weird. I was like, you don't know what this looks like. It could be, you could be signing yourself up for, I don't know, disaster.
You had a friendly face.
Yeah, I guess so. So I think I had 6 weeks and I put together like 10 4 feet by 6 foot paintings. I was painting this in my bedroom. At the time I had these paintings stapled to my wall and like I had paint on the wall, in my bed, like it was like everywhere. But I was so excited for this opportunity. So we did an opening in the lobby of the hotel. And from there, the owner saw the work and ended up commissioning me for every floor of the hotel.
Wow.
So that was pretty amazing, and my confidence and probably my ego like grew a little bit. But yeah, that was a very, like, gave me a lot of confidence. And so I started to believe that I could do it. Actually, after that happened, I quit my job as a coffee maker, which was not a bad idea to do. So yeah, so that was like the first major thing that happened that really gave me confidence. And then secondly, I mean, since that happened, I started showing at art fairs and showing my work in coffee shops and kind of like trying to get as much exposure as possible. I put on a show for myself in a space that's now the Drake Hotel, but Alyssa Sexton and Tien Hung. Alyssa was the old director of Bau-Xi, and Tien's the owner of Bau-Xi. They came into that show. They asked me if I wanted an interview. And of course I was like, oh my God, this is like I was gonna say dream hotel, but kind of. Dream gallery. And yeah, I went in and I had the interview, and I remember something that Tien said to me. He said, I respect my artists and they respect me. And just working with the gallery for the last 15 years,
yeah.
And I've known you. Kyle and I actually went to OCAD together.
Yes, we did, many moons ago.
We were actually talking about Tien, who owns Bau-Xi, and just like, he's such a man of integrity.
Yeah.
And Bau-Xi has set the precedence for like all the other galleries that I work with, because it's just, you guys are just such a good gallery. And part of it is that they pay their artists before you get paid. And I don't know if I'm supposed to be saying that, but like it's really nice to like get paid, you know, when you've done all this work and you have all these overhead costs. And I've even had delivery people that also work with you talk about Bau-Xi, and they're just like, we get paid.
Yeah.
And we feel so respected, and like, you know, and that's really how it's been for the last 15 years. And I'm so honored to be a part of this gallery and this gorgeous space.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
That's very nice. And yeah, you know, Janna's been with the gallery for 15 years. I've been with the gallery for 17. So I've known Tien for a long time as well. And yeah, that's one of the reasons why the gallery's been around since 1965. We're going to be celebrating 60 years next year, which is a massive accolade.
Yes.
And one of the reasons we do that is because of the relationships that we have in our community with our clients, some of whom I'm sure you are, our artists and our suppliers. So yeah, it's really important that we conduct ourselves in the best possible way. Mm-hmm. But I guess, yeah, speaking of Bau-Xi and our 15th year anniversary, with over 15 years of success, what advice would you give to artists who are exploring a career as an artist?
Oh man, I could give a lot of advice. I actually was like, I wish I could start a class at OCAD on business. I would love to do that.
That would be great.
Yeah. Actually, Kyle and I we loved going to OCAD because, I mean, look at us now. We're, you know, in great positions. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we had an abstract painting class together, and we both are a little bit traumatized by it still.
She's like a practicing artist, so we know how that went.
Yeah. Okay, so I would say the first thing is don't rely on inspiration. I have a lot of people ask me if I paint when I'm inspired, and I paint all the time. And I think inspiration is something that happens as you practice. It's kind of like when you decide to work out and you don't feel like it. Sometimes mid working out, like your blood starts flowing and you're like, okay, like we're in flow right now. So yeah, I do not paint when I'm inspired. I paint, it's a practice. I paint every day, and it's something that has to be cultivated and yeah, just done every day. Secondly, I would say try to get as much exposure as possible. Because no one's gonna see your work if you're not putting it out there. And that's something that, you know, I think some people feel really precious about their work, and they don't know if it's good enough, they don't know if it's ready to be exposed yet. But like what I found from doing outdoor shows and being exposed to the public is that you get this feedback. And it helped me grow a bit of some skin being out in the open and hearing what people were saying about my work. And it gave me some good feedback too. And so yeah, I think it's like being an artist is about bringing more beauty to the world, and you can't do that if you're holding it in. So there's lots of ways to do it. Instagram is an amazing tool that we have today. The outdoor shows, a lot of galleries come by. Yeah, as much exposure as possible, I would say. And then thirdly, we just kind of talked about this a little bit. I started a rug business a few years ago, and it was really, really interesting being in the design world, because designers are forced to, like, not only do they create something, but they also have to brand it and package it and market it. And so in the design world, you're forced, because designers generally don't have galleries representing their work. You have to be your own, you have to advocate for your own business. So that was a really eye-opening to kind of be in both worlds for a little bit, to be in, you know, as an artist with the gallery, selling your work. And so I really don't like this myth of starving artists. I think that some people use that as a crutch to like not add to just, you know, they're like, oh, well, I'm an artist, I'm not good at business. But I think it's really, really important to understand what's going on with your numbers and like be really aware. And I went to George Brown to do a little business class. And so yeah, I think that you don't have to be good at business, but I think being aware of like how things happen is really important.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think to your first point, you know, don't rely on inspiration. You are, without a doubt, one of our hardest working artists and most prolific, I think, as shown by the amount of work around us. And the fact that you're represented in Toronto, Vancouver, our gallery in Seattle, and then I think you have, is it 2 galleries in the States?
Yeah, I have Texas.
Yeah.
Seattle. Danielle, is Danielle here?
New York?
New York. Taiwan. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, Janna's constantly working, constantly painting, constantly creating, and sort of, you know, not everything is going to be a quote unquote success, but it's about continuing to push through and finding the successes in everything that you make and not getting discouraged. So, yeah. I guess that leads really nicely into what would you say has been one of the biggest challenges as an artist?
I would say, I mean, specifically in my early days, the biggest challenge for me was creating structure in my life, because, I mean, in the early days, I was like partying a lot, sleeping in, going to bed at 3 in the morning, and like painting when I felt inspired to, or you know, painting when I was drunk, just like, you know, it was just like a paint party all the time, it was fun. But like getting more serious with my practice, I really had to create structure. And it was hard because I like being a free-flowing person. I like doing things when I feel like it. I don't like committing to like something on Thursday. I don't do that type of thing. I like to like confirm maybe like 30 minutes beforehand. So yeah, it was really important for me to build structure. So I started getting up at 7:30 in the morning, working out, going to therapy, like creating like things that I do at certain times every day, and that was very, very good for my mental health.
Yeah.
And when I have my mental health, I can make really good paintings.
Yeah.
So that's been key.
Fantastic to hear. Yeah, any type of self-growth is really important, and in finding ways that you can do it in incremental ways too. Not about like I have to make this change, but slowly working along.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess what has surprised you the most in the last 15 years of showing with the gallery?
So what has surprised me the most? I guess talking about the beginning and being a little bit structureless, I used to think that I needed a drink to get out of my head and get into my body and kind of go down the creative slide. So yeah, in the beginning, I would always have a drink before I painted. And then, there's a time with this lack of structure and no accountability, I'm basically drinking on the job, which is cool. But there's a point where it's not cool. Yeah. And I might have made a really good painting, but then relationships were suffering and I was starting to become super anxious and super depressed. And it was no longer the alcohol was no longer helping that. It was also creating it. So I think it was 2017, I took a break from alcohol for the first time and I painted a show and sober, and it was the best show I'd ever painted, and it sold out, and it had a different kind of power in it. And so that really surprised me because I always thought that I needed a drink to relax.
A crutch.
Yeah, a crutch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
And so, yeah, since then I've been 3 years sober now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And it just gets better and better. I feel like my life now is I'm tapping into different kinds of joy, and there's nothing involved in it other than my internal being. Yeah. And that's something that you can't do when you're drunk all the time. So.
No, I as somebody who's will be sober 2 years myself.
Congratulations.
It's you don't realize how it affects you until things begin to change in your life beyond your control, and you have an understanding. It's I don't need this. I don't need this to.
It's not helping.
Yeah, to be social or do these or create work. So that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And going back to your process and your practice, could you tell me a bit about how it's evolved?
So my earlier work, if you've been following my work, I know some of you have. Helen has been here along the way the whole time. I used to do a lot more color blocking, and I had a gallerist come into my studio once, and Parina Dimi, who's tragically no longer with us, but she critiqued my work and she said that something that I needed to learn in those earlier days was how to mix. And I was like, well, how do I learn how to mix? And she said, go to Montreal, go to New York, go to all the galleries and just study other people's paintings and see how they mixed. So over the past years, there's been different elements that I've added into my work. For a while I was doing kind of some architectural drawing, which I found was grounding the work. But yeah, it's ever changing, and I love that. I love finding new elements and playing with them, and so yeah.
Yeah, I think you've become quite adept at mixing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And just also the scale of the work, how you, in some of the larger scales, you create your own paintbrushes basically, to be able to make these massive marks. So it's really exciting.
Yeah, and a lot of the evolution is happy accident. I know Bob Ross has a quote about happy little accidents. I dressed up as Bob Ross for Halloween, by the way. And so I found some of his quotes, and it's taking those happy accidents and figuring out how they happened and studying them and then technically being able to use them.
Yeah, and some, ingenuity as well, thinking like, okay, well, what can I do to, it's a visual medium, so you have an idea in your mind, and it's about finding a way to make that a reality. And yeah, I think that's one of the most exciting things about talking to artists is like those little happy accidents coming through. How have you found your own voice in your work?
So I think in the beginning, specifically as a new painter who is learning how to paint and how to mix, I think it takes an idea to get to an idea. And I was specifically very inspired by Cy Twombly, Joan Mitchell. But I think when you're finding your own voice, it's important to feel inspired by other people's work, but not mimic the mark making. Like, it's kind of like taking the energy of it in, but like getting the actual painting out of your line of sight, and then just cultivating. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I used to try to like cultivate inspiration from other paintings, the energy of them. And then through that inspiration, you start to paint like yourself. You can't not, especially after doing it more and more. It just is something that comes out. And I was once challenged. I don't know if they were being mean, but someone was like, I bet you can't make a white painting. I was like, oh yeah? So someone challenged me to make a really quiet painting. And so I took up the challenge and I made this really quiet painting. I think it had about 9 different tones of white in it. And then I did this like really quiet stroke throughout it, this like ribbon-like stroke. And it was really serene and really beautiful and unlike any of my work at the time. And I tried doing it again. I had no idea how I made it. It was like, I don't know if it was a happy accident because I was like consciously trying to make something quiet, but I worked for about 2 years to try to figure out how to be in control of this stroke. And then I finally learned how to pull color through it also. And then, you know, I guess now that these ribbon-like strokes are part of my signature marks. So yeah, it just kind of, sometimes you find something and you got to work it through and work it through and work it through. So
yeah, and putting in those hours.
Putting in the hours, it's important.
Yeah, and again, not relying on inspiration, just sort of just piece after piece after piece and finding those little things that you want to pick at and sort of bring to the forefront.
Yeah.
For the next question, I'm going to read a quote, so forgive me, I'm going to use my phone, but art critic Donald Brackett described your work as representing significant development in biomorphic abstraction. And I quote, Watson's kind of dramatic abstraction utilizes a visual language with repeated patterns incorporating biomorphic shapes which, while not literally representational, nonetheless mirror natural and organic exchanges of energy with the viewer, instantly identifies as an uncanny symbol of something without a name, something one connects with at a primal and unconscious level. So in this show, speaking with tongues alludes to an eternal language without words. Could you tell us a bit more about this?
So with this show, I wanted to bring into the artist statement my kind of struggle with finding the words and or if, like using a language that doesn't have words, and I wanted to like delve into the language of negative space. So I started making these full bleed paintings about a year ago, and I work on the floor. So especially with these bigger pieces, I'm like on top of the work, crawling around, and I feel like I'm in the painting. Like it's almost like, you know, when you look at yourself in a mirror, you're like, you can't really see, but there's that like space that's necessary to see clearly. So I wanted to show the viewer how I feel when I'm inside of my work. And so like often when I'm working on these little compositions, I feel completely inside of the work. So that's how these full bleed paintings have come about. And when I started the show, I pulled a tarot card because I was like, what am I gonna do? What is this? Help me, someone, something help me here. And I pulled the Ace of Cups, which is one of my favorite cards. The Ace of Cups represents, cups in the tarot represents emotions, and the Ace of Cups represents new things. So it could be like a new proposal or a new relationship or a new job, but something that's like gives you a lot of hope and a lot of joy. So I was inspired to, with these kind of more empty, vast, quiet pieces, I wanted to transmit the energy of joy and this like kind of watery feeling. Mm-hmm. And when I was moving them around in my studio, they were giving the full bleed paintings this really interesting feeling. Mm-hmm. Like the bigger painting, full bleed painting changed depending on which painting was beside it, and it was so interesting. I wish we could like move the paintings around right now, but we're not going to do that. And yeah, it was really fascinating, this language that the paintings were having with each other, and mm-hmm. It was the language of negative space. Negative space is like the airspace around things. It's kind of like the energy between things that makes the thing the thing. Yeah. And so that's where I'm getting at with this conversation about language. And because I grew up in the Pentecostal church, speaking in tongues is a huge part of that. It's considered a language that doesn't have words, or like a way of praying to the angels, or just like invoking an utterance of spirit. And so I decided to bring these two things together. And I think it's really interesting because in the outer world, like tarot and evangelicals, like witchcraft, that is a no-no. That is the devil's work. But internally, speaking in tongues is something that I've brought with me. I'm not a Pentecostal and I don't align with a lot of the belief system, but I actually do speak in tongues. I feel like it's a really meditative way of connecting to my higher power. And I feel like this show kind of brought together these two aspects of myself that conflict in the outer world but give me peace in the inner world. Yeah. And so that's why I wanted to be more vulnerable about this show and kind of how it's integrated into my being.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, and also like thinking about how the two, the full bleeds and then these sort of color fields combined together, it's reflective of the your work indicatively, how they are incorporated in the same panel. Mm-hmm. So you're sort of exploring two separate parts of it and mm-hmm. seeing how they interact independently of one another.
Yeah, and it was a struggle to not go deeper into these paintings. It was a huge struggle. I originally wanted to make composition inside of it, but every time I came to it, like the painting just said no.
So like a painting inside of a painting?
Huh?
A painting inside.
Yes.
That's what it sounded like.
Yeah.
How deep can I go in this painting? So your recent statement speaks about your religious upbringing. Would you like to say that there's a spiritual element in the work?
I would definitely say there's a spiritual element because I'm a spiritual person, and I don't know if it's ADD or what it is, but I actually have a really hard time meditating. But I feel like I'm meditating when I'm with the work, and I'm able to get into out of my head and into my body and into this other flow really easily. And these days I'm more interested in concepts that Taoism has and indigenous beliefs, because there's more of this belief in harmony with the world that you're in. And Taoism has this really interesting concept called Wu-Wei, which is effortless action, which really has to do with letting go. And so a secret that I have is that when you mix a Chinese red with a Payne's gray, which are two of my favorite colors, they cancel each other and they turn black. But when you bring a titanium white into the mix, it expands the colors into this beautiful way. And Taoism is really about accepting the darkness and the light inside of yourself. And when I started with this painting, it kind of felt like an enchanted garden to me. Like there's decay and there's beauty. I actually, there was a baby here at my opening and she was like, flowers, she was looking at it, and I was like, yeah, like I feel like there's like an internal garden here. And I feel like when I'm painting, I'm an equal player to the work, to the paints, actually. I feel like I show up the way that they're showing up. And we just have a relationship of letting things go and letting things unfold the way that they want to.
Yeah.
And so I find these spiritual ways of thinking really helpful. And yeah, there's definitely an element of letting go that I think is really important.
Yeah, it definitely comes through in the work. Yeah, and I guess we've talked about a lot of things, but are there any final thoughts that you want to share with the audience?
So there's a musician that I really love. Her name is Elise Pai, and she's an Inuit musician. And I was watching an interview that she had, and she said that in the Inuit language, there's actually no word for artist because they consider everyone to be creative. So I love that. I think that's so beautiful. And I think that we all have the capacity, whether we're artists or not, whether we, make a living from it or not, to live creative lives. And, I think living a creative life is staying really curious about everything, about other people's beliefs. It's about taking risks, and it's about doing new things.
Yeah.
So do new things every day.
Well, thank you for that. And before we finish, I will say that anyone who showed up a little late, we are recording this, so we'll be on our YouTube channel, and we'll have snippets of it on Instagram and Reels. But with that, thank you very much, Janna.
My pleasure.
We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.